Welcome to Inside American Politics by Scoob. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most fascinating and complex relationships in modern geopolitics, the intricate dance between the Vatican and American politics. You might think you understand the separation of church and state, but what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about papal influence in the corridors of Washington power. From secret diplomatic cables exposed by WikiLeaks to Supreme Court justices, from presidential campaigns to foreign policy negotiations, the Pope's fingerprints are everywhere. So buckle up, because we're about to take you inside a world where ancient religious authority meets 21st century political machinery, and the results are more explosive than you ever imagined. Before we dive into the political intrigue, let's get our bearings straight. Because here's the thing most people get wrong. They think the Pope, the Holy See, and Vatican City are all the same thing. They're not, and understanding these distinctions is crucial to grasping how Vatican influence actually works. Think of it like this. Imagine the president, the executive branch, and the White House. One is a person, one is an organization, and one is a place. The Pope is the person in charge, the Bishop of Rome, elected by the College of Cardinals to serve as the Supreme Pontiff of the Catholic Church. He's the head bishop of all Catholics throughout the world, and here's the kicker. He's legally the absolute ruler of the microstate of Vatican City. The Holy See? That's the organization he runs, the diplomatic and administrative apparatus of the Catholic Church. And Vatican City itself? It's a 100-acre microstate right in the heart of Rome, ceded to the Church in the 1920s as part of the Lateran Accord. When you walk into St. Peter's Square, you're literally leaving Italy and entering another country. No passport required, but you've crossed an international border. This unique setup gives the Pope something no other religious leader on earth possesses, a triple threat of institutional, diplomatic, and soft power that operates on a global scale. And as we'll see throughout this episode, American politicians have learned to both fear and exploit this power in ways that would make Machiavelli jealous. The Vatican isn't just playing spiritual games here. They're pursuing concrete political objectives: religious freedom, human rights, global disarmament, eradication of poverty, and what they call a social justice agenda. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike countries that are supposed to act in their own interests, the Vatican claims to operate from moral authority. Whether you buy that or not, world leaders certainly take it seriously. Let's jump right into one of the most explosive moments in recent papal political history. Picture this. It's 2016, Republican presidential primaries are heating up, and Donald Trump is making his signature pitch about building a wall along the Mexican border. Then, out of nowhere, Pope Francis drops a political bomb that reverberates from Rome to Iowa. "It is stunning," said former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. "I don't ever remember in my lifetime that a pope has ever injected himself into the specifics of an American presidential election, and specifically calling out a candidate." What happened? Pope Francis called Trump not Christian for proposing to build that wall. Not misguided, not mistaken, not Christian. For an institution that claims moral authority over 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide, them's fighting words. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Pope's attack backfired spectacularly. Instead of damaging Trump, it actually enhanced his appeal in the Republican primaries. Mary Madeline, a Republican strategist who opposed Trump, said the Pope gave Trump a big, fat, wet kiss, whether he meant to or not. Even Jeb Bush blamed his South Carolina primary loss partly on the Pope intervening in American politics. Rush Limbaugh spotted the hypocrisy immediately. Has he questioned the faith of the Castro brothers? Has the Pope questioned the faith of any communist leaders? Has he ever said that Mao Zedong, that Fidel Castro, any other communist is not a Christian? Why Donald Trump? 'Cause Trump wants to build a wall? This wasn't just a random papal outburst. It revealed Francis's entire worldview. His open borders ideology flows from what he calls an anti-capitalist, third-worldist view that poor countries have a right to the wealth of richer countries. In his encyclical Laudato Si', he literally calls for stronger and more efficiently organized international institutions to manage migration. Francis believes that if the goods of the earth were more equitably distributed, people wouldn't need to migrate. As he puts it, these poor people are fleeing war, hunger, but that is the tip of the iceberg, because underneath that is the cause, and the cause is a bad and unjust socioeconomic system. Translation: if the poor have a right to the property of the rich, they also have a right to citizenship in their countries. After Trump won the presidency, did Francis back down? Absolutely not. He immediately called on U.S. bishops to ramp up their amnesty advocacy, mindful of the contribution that the Hispanic community makes to the life of the nation. The political game was just beginning. If you thought the Trump confrontation was remarkable, wait until you hear about Pope Francis's love affair with Bernie Sanders. This is where the Vatican's political preferences became crystal clear. In April 2016, at the height of the Democratic primaries, Sanders received something no other presidential candidate got: an invitation from the Holy See to lecture at the Vatican and meet Pope Francis personally. The official explanation: "We invited the candidate who cites the Pope the most in his campaign, and that is Senator Bernie Sanders," said Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo, head of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. But Sanders himself revealed the deeper connection. In a 2015 interview with Vatican spokesman Father Thomas Rosica, Sanders spoke about Pope Francis as a fellow socialist. Well, what it means to be a socialist in the sense of what the Pope is talking about, what I'm talking about, is to say that we have got to do our best and live our lives in a way that alleviates human suffering. Sanders was thrilled to see Pope Francis inveigh against the idolatry of money and to say maybe that's not what human life should be about, and that is a very, very radical critique of the hyper-capitalist system, world system, that we're living in today. During his Vatican visit, Sanders told the Italian newspaper La Repubblica, "Look, I believe that the reason for which I was invited to participate in this conference is that many of the issues which the Pope tackles are similar to mine." Think about this for a moment. While Francis's Vatican rolled out the red carpet for a socialist who famously honeymooned in the Soviet Union, they adopted a decidedly frosty tone toward Republicans. The message couldn't have been clearer, and it wasn't just symbolic. George Soros was pouring money into groups like Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good to capitalize on what they called the Francis effect in U.S. politics. In 2016, they put out a Pope Francis Values Reflection Guide, designed to steer Catholics toward voting for Hillary Clinton. The document was disseminated by a coalition of Catholic front groups, including the Franciscan Action Network, Pax Christi USA, and the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio captured the left's excitement perfectly. This is a leader such as we haven't seen before, really. He is saying things so clearly and so powerfully all over the world that need to be said. He's moving people on an extraordinary level. The relationship between progressive Democrats and Pope Francis reveals a sophisticated political operation that would make any campaign manager proud. They've turned papal statements into political weapons with surgical precision. Take Nancy Pelosi's strategy. She's weaponized Pope Francis against Republican opponents, using his comments about LGBTQ+ issues as a political shield. When Pope Francis made his famous "Who am I to judge?" comment about gay people, Pelosi pounced. Referring to Marco Rubio's opposition to gay marriage, she said she didn't think that Pope Francis would subscribe to what Marco Rubio just said. This became a template. Jack Conway, Kentucky's Attorney General who supports gay marriage, deployed the same tactic. Our new pope recently said on an airplane, "Who am I to judge?" The new pope has said a lot of things that Catholics like me really like. But the crown jewel of this strategy was Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton's 2016 vice presidential pick. Educated by Jesuits, Kaine supports abortion rights and gay marriage while packaging his economic leftism as Catholic social justice. He calls Pope Francis his hero and has spoken admiringly of his respect for the late Marxist priest Father James Carney, whom Kaine visited in Central America in the 1980s during Carney's time as a chaplain to communist guerrillas. In 2016, Kaine cited Pope Francis's support for contraceptive use in Zika virus cases during a debate over Planned Parenthood funding. The political calculation was obvious: use papal authority to provide religious cover for progressive positions. Hillary Clinton correctly assumed that U.S. bishops would offer little criticism of her addition of a heterodox Catholic to her ticket. Several Francis-friendly bishops actually ran interference for her. San Jose's bishop, Patrick McGrath, wrote a letter saying Trump's complaints about a rigged system borders on the seditious. Even when it came out that Clinton's aides had engaged in anti-Catholic bigotry, calling conservative Catholics severely backwards in exposed emails, few bishops complained. Just days before the presidential election, Pope Francis denounced politicians who speak about erecting walls, prompting Slate and other publications to run headlines like, "It sure sounds like Pope Francis doesn't think Americans should vote for Trump." But here's the kicker. Despite all this papal influence, it proved hollow. Trump won the Catholic vote 52 to 45%. According to the Italian press, many of Pope Francis's aides viewed the election as a bitter defeat. The people's pontiff looked more like the liberal elite's pontiff. Now let's talk about where Catholic influence in American politics has become most consequential: the Supreme Court. This is a story about how the center of Catholic political power shifted from ethnic neighborhoods to elite law schools, with earth-shaking consequences. Here's the stunning reality. The Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade was delivered by a court with a Catholic supermajority. 6 Catholic justices voted for Dobbs, fundamentally reshaping American law on abortion. Justice Clarence Thomas, speaking at a Catholic college commencement, declared, "And I am decidedly and unapologetically Catholic." This represents a seismic shift in how Catholic influence operates in America. Before John F. Kennedy became the first Catholic president in 1960, concerns about church influence were so strong that he had to give a famous speech declaring, "I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens also to be a Catholic." Kennedy won a decisive 80% of the Catholic vote, drawing from Irish, Polish, Italian, and German immigrants who lived in ethnic neighborhoods where church attendance was high and the church's influence was strong. That was the old model, ethnic Catholic precinct club Catholicism. But assimilation and suburban flight diluted that strength. By 2004, John Kerry, despite being Catholic, lost the Catholic vote. As one expert explains, that form of ethnic Catholic precinct club Catholicism is over. And it's over, I think, for a very simple reason. You're now 5-6 generations out from the first immigrant groups. The center of influence shifted when those same immigrant families found upward mobility through law school, producing growing numbers of Catholic lawyers and judges. Here's the key insight. To be on the Supreme Court, you have to have studied at elite law schools. But to be nominated by Republican presidents, you need to have moral views that are consonant with his political positions. Where do you find those moral views plus the elite credentials? Catholics. The impact has been enormous. U.S. Catholic bishops quickly praised the Dobbs Court for overturning what they called 50 years of unjust law that has permitted some to decide whether others can live or die. The Vatican pointed out that Pope Francis has spoken strongly and unequivocally against abortion. When asked whether their personal beliefs influence their rulings, Catholic justices consistently argue no. But the Dobbs ruling sparked heated debate about the separation of church and state, and revealed how Catholic legal minds have been laying groundwork for overturning Roe for decades. The infrastructure is impressive. Close to 6,000 Catholic schools and 18,000 parishes provide a ready-made network for organizing, creating a major presence at events like the annual March for Life in Washington. As one observer notes, the Catholic Church was the backbone of the pro-life movement for 50 years in the United States. Here's where we get into the real cloak and dagger stuff: how the Vatican operates as a secret diplomatic broker for the United States government. The Cuba case study reveals just how sophisticated and valuable this relationship really is. When WikiLeaks released those State Department cables, they exposed something remarkable: extensive communications between the U.S. State Department and the Holy See. Obama administration officials acknowledged that the Holy See was a unique actor in international relations because it wasn't just a state. As State Department leaders put it, "There's nobody else like this. These people are diplomatic representatives of a global institution, and we can work with them on all kinds of issues having to do with Middle Eastern politics, climate change, and diplomatic relations with Cuba. The Cuba operation was a masterpiece of backdoor diplomacy. The United States had broken off diplomatic relations with Cuba after the Castro Revolution and imposed an economic embargo for decades. Obama wanted to reach out to Cuba, but he knew he couldn't do it directly. So here's what he did. Obama contacted prominent Catholic bishops in the U.S., who are not only American citizens, but also bishops of the Catholic Church in communion with the Pope and connected to bishops worldwide. Catholic bishops in the U.S. and Cuba began communicating through diplomatic pouches sent from the Holy See in Vatican City to the U.S. State Department. The Vatican served as an honest broker with full secrecy and discretion between the Cuban and U.S. governments, mediated by bishops on both sides. The Vatican had contacts on both sides because there were large Catholic communities in both countries, and they used that trust to open a door that had been closed for decades. This is how the Vatican's unique position works in practice. Unlike countries that must act in their own interests, the Vatican can pursue broader goals: religious freedom, human rights, disarmament, eradication of poverty, their entire social justice agenda. This gives them credibility as neutral mediators that no other institution can match. The Church is involved in these kinds of negotiations constantly, operating behind the scenes in conflicts around the world. It's a diplomatic network that spans continents and operates with a level of trust and access that would make any intelligence agency jealous. Now let's get to what really makes the American establishment nervous about Pope Francis: his direct challenges to U.S. foreign policy and military actions. This isn't subtle diplomatic disagreement. This is toe-to-toe confrontation with the world's leading superpower. Pope Francis has gone head-to-head with Washington on everything from climate change to weapons sales, from financial system ethics to border walls. The U.S. establishment generally loathes being contradicted, and certainly not by a character whose very existence suggests they're doing something wrong. In September 2020, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited Rome and bluntly challenged the Vatican regarding its ongoing negotiations with China, where 12 million Catholics live. Pope Francis simply ignored the American official, while his advisors publicly reminded Pompeo that the Sino-Vatican deal is a matter that has nothing to do with American politics. This is a matter between churches and should not be used for this type of end. But it goes much deeper than diplomatic snubs. Francis has empowered Catholic regional leaders who defended Syrian President Bashar al-Assad as the only reliable protector of Christians and welcomed Russian military engagement. He's maintained respectful relationships with Shiite leadership in Iran while establishing new bridges to Sunni Muslim leaders. During his visit to the Holy Land, Francis spontaneously climbed out of his Pope-mobile to pray on the Palestinian side of the giant Israeli barrier wall, next to graffiti proclaiming "Free Palestine." Rome aligned with much of the world to oppose designating Jerusalem as Israel's capital, then joined the European Union, Russia, and the UN to oppose Israel's plan to annex 30% of the West Bank, both positions directly against the U.S. Francis has drawn closer to Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church, even as Western, U.S.-led coalitions hammer Russia with sanctions. Instead of calling the Ukraine conflict an invasion, he describes it as fratricide between Christians. The China deal particularly infuriates American officials. Francis negotiated with the Chinese government for 4 years, leading to a 2018 provisional agreement on appointing bishops. Despite this being largely an internal ecclesiastic matter with a non-public text, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon traveled between European luxury hotels using the China deal to attack Pope Francis and his Secretary of State. It's worth remembering that American leaders once recognized the truths Francis highlights. President Eisenhower said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed." The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. This is not a way of life at all. in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. Francis is essentially continuing that tradition, and Washington doesn't appreciate the criticism. As we close this chapter on papal influence in American politics, remember this: the Vatican's power isn't fading, it's shifting. And the next move's happening behind closed doors in Rome, and Washington might be even more consequential than what we explored today. But here's the twist. There's a part of this story we haven't uncovered yet, one that could change how you see the Pope's role in America's political future forever. To hear the full story and dive deeper into the secrets we couldn't fit here, download the Scoob app now. Unlock exclusive episodes, extended investigations, and bonus content you won't find anywhere else. Download Scoob today and step into the full investigation.